At the Roundtable this week, we are joined by journalist Chris Knight and Nancie Battaglia, who are both heading to Russia this week to cover the Winter Olympics in Sochi. Chris, a senior writer with the Adirondack Daily Enterprise, also a correspondent for North Country Public Radio. Nancie, a freelance photographer heading over, based in Lake Placid. You have covered, this is your 11th Winter Olympic Games?
Olympics, my 9th winter.
Amazing.
Yep.
Your photographs have appeared in national magazines, Sports Illustrated, National Geographic, New York Times, countless magazines, newspapers, and publications. And it's nice to have both of you here. We appreciate it.
Thank you.
Chris, this is going to be your first trip to the Winter Games.
That's right. Yeah, it's kind of daunting, but exciting at the same time.
And you're going to be covering the local athletes from the Adirondacks.
Yeah, that's really my focus. Is to there's a group of about 9 athletes from the Adirondacks, and I'm going to be really kind of covering the ins and outs of all of their sports, which are primarily ski jumping, also a lot of biathlon, and hopefully some downhill skiing as well. So,
and writing articles and keeping a blog.
Keeping a blog, social media, the whole gamut of trying to keep folks back here at home informed about what's happening with their local Olympians.
And Nancie, you mentioned this is the 11th for you.
11th
Winter Games. You've been there before.
9th Winter Games, 2 summer.
2 summer games.
2 summer, yeah.
So you were in Vancouver in 2010.
I was.
Your very first Winter Olympics, Lake Placid, 1980.
Exactly, right. Back when I was just a baby, right?
And you will truly be a freelancer. You're not necessarily working for any particular agency or
Correct. I am credentialed for Nancie Battaglia Photography. So I will pick up assignments or sell stock as I get it to different organizations. But I'm also covering for North Country Public Radio. They will be relying on me. And I do have requests from other ski-related publications and organizations at this point.
And the games are set up so that many of the events will be closer to Sochi, and the alpine events and such will be up in the mountains. You'll be primarily in the mountain region?
I'll probably stay in the mountains unless I decide to shoot something, perhaps women's hockey or something like that in downtown Sochi or wherever it actually is. But I plan to stay in the mountains. That's also where the sliding sports are. So we have the skiing and the sliding up in the mountains, which should be a good place to stay. And is that primarily where you'll be as well, Chris?
Yeah, for the most part, that's where most of the local Olympians, the sports that they're competing in, will be held. So that's where I'm going to be spending most of my time. I want to get down to the sort of coastal cluster, they call it, there on the Black Sea, and see some things there as well, if I can, if time allows it. We'll see.
But your hotels will be up closer to where you're actually covering the events.
That's right. And we're actually in the same hotel.
That's good. That's
a brand new one. We hope it has running water.
I know. We hope it's finished. We hope the construction is done. But it'll be cool to be with near Nancie, and she's a great veteran of covering the Olympics, and I'm probably lean on her once or twice or 10 times for some advice.
Sure. And actually, another reporter from the Adirondack Daily Enterprise, Lou Reuter, is going as well as senior sports writer. So
that's
two
right.
of you. That's quite something for a newspaper in the
of our
Adirondacks
size.
to send to reporters.
It is pretty remarkable. I would imagine, I don't know for sure, but we're probably the smallest daily newspaper that is going to be covering these games. And the reason we're able to do that is because my trip is funded really in large part, my travel, food, and lodging through a grant from the Decker Scholarship Fund, which was started by the family members of Charlie Decker, who was a former editor of the Enterprise and died at a very young age. And so that's helping to support my trip over to Sochi. And Lou, my colleague who's going, is in part funded by the New York Press Association, because some of the work he's doing is to cover other athletes from around New York State who will be competing in these games.
I imagine you have to do that, otherwise it would be a pretty daunting cost, I imagine, to send 2 reporters to cover
it
the
would
Olympics.
Be in particular because of where the games are this year and the costs of these games. We had sent 2 reporters to Vancouver, but a lot of people have called that kind of your backyard games, right in our own backyard, really. So that the expense wasn't as much to get there. We've had reporters cover a couple other Winter Olympics as well in the past, but just this year, the cost of it would have been insurmountable without this generous support we've had. So.
And you mentioned getting there; it's no easy task. The Sochi on the Black Sea, but you've got to go to Paris or Frankfurt and then to Moscow, and then so it's going to be a full day or day and a half of traveling just to get there.
Yeah, it's going to be extensive. That's the one part I'm not looking forward to, I guess. And everybody talking about security too, and I kind of feel like I'll be safer when I get there. I'm sort of worried about more the getting there than I am while I'm there.
And we should be.
Yeah.
Right. I think, you have to be careful in all the airports, and I think security will be tight the whole way through.
Yeah, and we have heard so much about that in recent weeks, about the threats, about the security surrounding the games. How much of a concern is that for you?
I'm pretty concerned about it. I've been to many Olympics. Granted, there is high security every time you go to an Olympics, but I'm expecting there will be more at this Olympics, and I'm hoping there will be more, and I'm hoping it's working.
Yeah.
But, you get used to it. Even, I can go all the way back to Lake Placid, and I remember guys in white snowsuits hiding in snowbanks, and that was the SWAT team. And that was kind of an eye-opener for me,
Of course,
at a young age.
Of course, back in 1980, that was just a few years after Munich in '72,
Correct.
which really led to new increased security at the games, protecting the athletes and the journalists covering the events.
Correct.
And the Salt Lake Games, of course, too, came just a few months after September 11th, so there was a lot of security concern there then too. I guess from our perspective here back home, it seems like so much more of an unknown to us about really what the Russians are going to be doing security-wise. They've said they're going to be doing this, that, but we've also heard in recent weeks that they've rejected some of the offers from the U.S. to be able to assist with some of its sort of network of terrorist prevention sort of methods. So just like Nancie, I'm concerned too. But I'm also concerned about just getting out there and being able to do the job I need to do, and not having that overwhelm things or preventing me from being able to get to the venues on time, and because I'm held up at some security checkpoint. So there's that side of it too, not only your own personal safety, but how it's going to affect the work that you need to do.
Did it make it a difficult decision to decide whether to go to the games?
I don't think I thought about it too much when I was deciding that I would apply for a credential again. I certainly, it wasn't forefront in my mind. And then as we've gotten closer, I'm becoming much more aware that I really need to pay attention and what the tensions are in that country. So yeah, at this point, yeah.
Yeah, when I first, this opportunity came up, I thought of those concerns as well, but I just looked at it as probably the opportunity of a lifetime for me, having never been to an Olympics before. And while those things are concerns, sometimes you have to just take a chance and hope that everything is going to be as safe as it can be, so that you can try to have this kind of an opportunity, which will be benefit our readers here in the Adirondacks, and benefit me as a journalist for a lot of years in the future.
Do you think the extra layers of security will make it more challenging or tougher for you to do your jobs?
Speaking from experience, the last few Olympics, it slows things down. When you're carrying a large knapsack full of metal items, which are known as cameras and camera gear, you are expected to take that off, and they go through it at every checkpoint on the way in, and you're taking lens caps off, and you're wondering, why am I doing this again and again? But you have to do it again and again.
It's like airline security. It's
yeah.
one of those things where it's a hassle, but
we're glad they're there.
We're glad they're there.
Yeah.
So
it's
I
like,
think it's
thank you
just
for doing this. Yeah.
leaving early each day to make sure there's plenty of time to get to the venues, and that's going to be the sort of a time management thing we'll have to get ready for.
I think it's a learning curve for the organizers also. When they realize how many photographers or media might get off of one bus and need to come in at the same time, that they may need to have extra people there working and open extra lines so that they can speed the process up. The other thing that I've always thought about Olympics, though, is that they're a sacred event, and because they're sacred, everything will go fine, and bad things will not happen there. So I'm hoping that happens with this as well.
One other thing to mention, I've been talking to some of the athletes in advance of the games for our preview coverage, and asking them a little bit about security. And the sort of standard response you get is, well, we're not too concerned. We feel like they're doing everything they can to be safe. But I've also heard from talking to some athletes recently that they're worried that it's going to sort of be overwhelming, for sort of taking away from the story of the games themselves. Not so much affecting them personally, but all the stories you've seen here in the lead up to the games, about security, could some of those stories also have been about some of the athletes instead?
Right.
You know, they want the stories of the games to be told.
And we've been hearing about that it's sort of taking away from the Olympic spirit, from what makes the Olympics so great.
And it's a big issue, no doubt. I don't want to downplay it, but at the same time, it'd be nice to kind of get to the games and start focusing on the athletes and have that be the only thing we have to worry about.
So all the athletes are going from the Adirondacks. They're in. What about their families, though? Some of them thinking twice about going over, and as far as we know, are our family members still on as far as going?
Yeah, it's kind of half and half from what I know. You know, we have some folks like you know, Billy DeMong's mom, Helen. I know some of his family is going, but you know, Tim Burke, who's a biathlete from Saranac Lake, Paul Smith's. You know, his family has decided not to go, in part because of some of the logistics and the costs and getting a visa. So, you know, I don't know that I've talked to too many folks who've said security concerns are a reason why they're not going. That might be one of the reason, you know, list of reasons why they're not going. But, you know, there are quite a few family members who've decided not to go to these games.
For others, it may be the distance. Like you said, Vancouver is one thing. Sochi may be quite a different story, getting there and the expense and going, and so.
And what they can expect when they get there. I know, talking to the Burkes, I think it was this summer, or maybe it was early fall, talking with Jack Burke, and he said, oh no, they're not going. And I'm like, oh, you're not going to go? And one thing that I do know is they like to ski and enjoy the area that they're going to in between, you know, all the various events that they go to in between the biathlon. Right. And he wasn't sure they'd be able to do that. So
they'd be limited in what they could do.
Right, exactly.
So.
Yeah.
Well, let's talk about the athletes. Some are familiar faces, as you mentioned, familiar names. Billy DeMong, who won gold in Vancouver, Lowell Bailey, Tim Burke. Many of the names are familiar names from past years, off to another Winter Games.
I think there's going to be some great stories, you know, from these games. You know, regardless of, you know, whether there are medals or not. You know, you have great, you know, folks like Bailey and Burke who've been doing this for years and have been on the Olympic stage before, and you know, they've really shined in the last 3 or 4 years on the, you know, biathlon circuit. You know, moving up in sort of the world rankings, and really this is sort of seen as the time where the U.S. might finally get an Olympic medal in biathlon, and you know, there's a lot of hope for that. And you know, on the women's biathlon side, you have Annalise Cook from Saranac Lake, who's going to her first Olympics, but she's also almost the same age as Burke and Bailey, and has been doing this for a long time too. So, you know, there's a real you know, brimming optimism from the Saranac Lake area to see all these great athletes.
So for you as a writer, that's great. You've got the experienced guys who are this time trying to get on the medals podium, and you also have the new face, the very first Olympics.
Yeah.
That's always makes for great stories.
It's very good. And then you've got, you know, Billy DeMong, who's, you know, one of 2 5-time Olympians who are going to be at these games. The only person who's been to more Olympics there will be one of his teammates, Todd Lodwick, who will be at his 6th Olympics. So you've got an incredibly strong Nordic combined team, along with the Fletcher brothers, and you know, we're hopeful that, you know, it'd be great to see Billy get another medal, and we'll keep our fingers crossed that he can do that. But just to have those folks out there again is fantastic.
Although after winning the gold, everyone will be gunning for him now in Sochi. And for you, Nancie, you actually obviously know the local athletes. They train, many of them live in the Lake Placid and Tri-Lakes area, so you've covered them and covered their World Cups here for a number of years. But for you obviously also have to be aware of all of the athletes as a freelance photographer, looking for that shot.
Who's going to win, right? Who's going to win, and is it a good picture, and whatever. But I pay close attention to the local athletes, and a lot of my requests for this year are actually the local athletes, and part of that is because they're so good now. Yeah. You know, they might medal. Everyone's, you know, a medal contender. Yeah. And you never know who's going to pop a medal. Andrew Weibrecht, you know, in Vancouver. I'm not sure anyone was thinking he was going to, you know, be on the podium, but there he was.
That's nice. He won the bronze medal,
yep.
And he did make the Alpine team this time. He has been hurting, though, as he heads to Sochi now.
Yeah, he's had a rough last few years with injuries and illness and just not getting the results that he's wanted to. And so, you know, at one point I had a conversation with him before the games here, and he said honestly that, you know, you get kicked so many times, there's only so long that you can take that. And so I asked him, you know, were you thinking of quitting? And he said it never got that far, but he really had to rethink things and what he was doing, and you know what he wanted to do. So, you know, but now he finally feels pretty healthy, and we're hopeful to see him charge down the hill like we know he can do. That's kind of his MO, that aggressive skiing style, and it's going to be exciting to see him out there.
And Peter Fournette, the ski jumper from Saranac Lake, just a kid when he made the team in 2010, now a little more experienced, and this time around, is he rising in the sport to the point where he might be able to medal?
He told me he's not a medal contender necessarily, and he said that himself when I talked to him a few weeks ago, but he's just hopeful to get out there and be able to put down the best jumps that he can and say, I gave it my all. And I think for a lot of these athletes, that's really kind of the goal, So he hasn't necessarily reached that stage, but again, you never necessarily know. Some of these sports, it's just a matter of inches or a fraction of a second or a little extra, push here and there, and you don't know what will happen. That's what's so exciting about the Olympics.
The best guy might trip off the end run or whatever. So yeah,
you never know. Yeah. You both have covered many of these athletes for years as they've grown up and trained in Lake Placid. Now on the world stage, undoubtedly will be one of the most memorable competitions for their careers. Same thing for both of you. I know 11 Olympics. One might wonder.
It might be time to throw in the towel after this one.
But still, for you and all you do and all the events you cover, where do the Olympics rank as far as professionally for you covering something like this?
Well, it's big time. It doesn't get any bigger than that. And I've been a lucky girl that I've been able to go to as many as I have and to get published. And to watch the local kids from being little widgets. I remember some of these guys I remember when they were born, unfortunately, but yeah. But they started competing and doing these things when they're, 4, 5, 6 years old. You've got these little kids going off the little moguls and learning how to ski jump. And to watch them come through, and do the local races and then get on to, college races and then into national teams and then into World Cups, and bingo, they're at the Olympics now. Yeah, and it's a pretty big it's a pretty amazing thing to watch.
It's pretty special to
really
be living in these communities and see these people do what they do, and be able to tell your kids, hey, this guy lives down the street.
Exactly.
And, I'll go home. There's been times I would go home and be sitting with my family, and one of our athletes would be on, and I'll say, oh, I know that guy. And my father will look at me like, I'm like, yeah, they live in Lake Placid. Yeah,
it's
that
funny.
Sort of thing, yeah.
The way everybody puts their arms around Olympic athletes. This guy's from Saranac Lake, this guy's from Lake Placid. I did a story a couple weeks ago about Michaela Schifrin, that she has actually some ties to Malone, which a few people up here knew about, and which was kind of cool. And she's this teenage skiing phenom that everybody is really excited about. In alpine skiing, she's going to be skiing slalom. So there's sort of, and I talked to a friend of mine about that, and he said the way people sort of say, oh, that guy was from Lake Placid, or he lived here for a couple of years, or she's got some family in Malone. The cool thing about that is it just spreads the Olympic spirit. Mm-hmm. It might seem like, it's a stretch that, Michaela Schifrin's cousin's uncle's family's brother's college roommate is from Malone, but it's that spreading of the Olympic spirit that makes this whole thing so cool.
And everyone does try to lay claim to these athletes. I mean, even Anders Johnson.
Right.
His family lived in Lake Placid, and they say he was born in Plattsburgh, so of course Plattsburgh is
Yeah,
probably claiming him, but my guess is he lived here for 24 hours, the first 24 hours of his life.
That's enough.
And then he was and so he's one of ours,
Right.
that sort of thing. But he's been, in Park City basically his whole life.
Yeah. And Billy DeMong, he continues to list his hometown as Vermontville, to his credit, which everybody in Vermontville loves, but he's lived in Park City for a number of years too. So, but it's just fun to be able to, in some way or other, reach out and put these athletes.
They're one of ours. They're one of ours.
Yeah, people are proud of them, and it's nice to be able to tell that story, to share that with everyone.
Mm-hmm.
Definitely.
So for you, Chris, how much are you looking forward to this?
Oh, incredibly. It's going to be amazing. I've been, it's in the last probably month and a half, I think about it just about every minute of the day. On the way here, I was listening to a Russian language translator app on my iPhone. All kinds of little things like that. Just running through my head all the time. So it's really exciting. It's going to be daunting, and I think the daunting part for me is not so much the security and stuff like that and the travel, but just being in the right place at the right time and knowing where I have to be because I've never done this before. That's the real sort of thing that I'm worried about the most. But at the same time, I know we're going to be there to capture some awesome moments and bring those to our readers and our listeners back here.
This will be so exciting to cover this, but I imagine this is going to be labor intensive. You are going to be working probably nonstop and doing some of the hardest work you've done in your career.
18-hour days are not uncommon. 16 to 18-hour days, and
Yeah, Lou
So,
told me he
get
had a
ready.
22-hour day at Vancouver or Salt Lake one
kidding.
time, or I think a 22-hour day when Billy DeMong won his gold medal.
Right. Okay.
So yeah, I'm a little nervous about that, but I'm ready for it.
But for these 2 weeks, are you running on adrenaline? Are you just
You are
the
running
thrill
on
of it?
adrenaline, right?
And-
I
and-
mean, yeah, the synergy, as I say, will get you through it. There's always a lot of excitement, with an Olympics. There is, the spirit is there, and everybody is like, just go,
Right.
and you do.
The one thing that I've thought about a lot is when I'm in these venues and I see Tim Burke skiing by, or I see Billy DeMong skiing by, or I see Peter Fournette, finish a jump at the bottom of the hill. How am I going to control myself from saying, hey, go Timmy, or something like, I feel like, normally as a journalist, you don't want to be
That's right.
part of the story and you're supposed to
think-
hold back, but I have a hard time.
I think in this case you'll be forgiven.
Am I going
if you're-
to be? Do you do that?
I
Is
have,
it okay
I have
to
to
cheer these guys
confess. I
on?
have to confess. I was at the finish line when Billy won his gold. I was at that event, and I'm in this scrum of media and photographers. And Billy's doing his, this, that, and the other thing, and people are yelling, Billy, 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 and he comes over and he gives me a hug. And I'm like, oh, don't look around, don't let the media, but yeah,
That's
so
nice.
that
And
was
when they
pretty
recognize
special.
you folks, that means a lot,
Yeah.
and that will mean a lot to them to see you there and have you there covering the games.
I think so, especially because in some cases they're going to have some family there, so it'll be good to have a familiar face, on the sidelines.
And folks will be able to read your articles and your blog online at
Yep.
Adirondack Daily
At
Enterprise.
AdirondackDailyEnterprise.com, LakePlacidNews.com, which is our weekly paper in Lake Placid. You'll also be able to follow there. And then, as you mentioned, I'm going to be doing some work for North Country Public Radio while I'm there as well.
As
So
will Nancy, and
Right.
and we'll look forward to seeing. We hope we see your photographs in some of the great
Somewhere
publications.
we'll be looking.
Great. Well, thank you
thank
both
you.
for taking the time to come in. We
thanks,
appreciate
Tom.
it.
Thank
Thank
you.
you.